All right. Hello. Welcome to our spring break version of Parenting Pit Stops. We are so excited that you took some time to jump on and hear some information about navigating test anxiety, which is a pretty common issue these days for our students. And we'll share some statistics about that, but it's been an interesting adventure for me the last few years, figuring out why our students are experiencing this on such a large scale. So, a little bit about me. Um, my name is Kelly Jo Morris, and I am currently a classroom behavior specialist with Region 9. And I formerly was a college and career readiness specialist. I was a teacher of career development prior to that. And then prior to that, when we go all the way back, I was a clueless high school graduate who had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I struggled a lot with test anxiety. I was not sure at all um, how to navigate that. And I really needed to find some tools in order to be able to figure out how to successfully take some exams, especially the further that I got into school. Oopsie daisies. So sorry. Melissa, come back. Where did it go? Silly
You
me.
do,
So sorry.
so that's okay. You just hit, you quit presenting. So just hit present.
Whoopsie daisy. Did it do it? Oh, fiddlesticks. Oh, fiddlesticks.
Okay, just hit present again.
I think I keep clicking out of it for some reason. Okay, we're back. So So let's talk about today's objectives. We have the basics of identifying test anxiety. Then we're going to talk about the brain and performance, and we'll talk about some tips and tools for how to navigate our test anxiety and see what we can do. Unless I figured out why it's doing that. One second. I'm trying to make sure that I see the Zoom so that way I can see you and it's not wanting to let me do that. That's why. Okay, let's try again. Nope, not doing it. So sorry, my glitchiness. I'll figure it out. Okay. Melissa, I will just rely on you. If something happens, if I stop or if I need to stop and answer a question as we go through, will you just holler at me since I can't see anybody right now? I'm just going to assume that you're saying yes.
Got it.
Like, oh, sorry.
Oh, I got it. I
Thank
will
you so
monitor the
much.
chat.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, 60% of students experience significant anxiety that interferes with performance capability. And that was a study that was done in 2014. So, what we have seen since 2014, if you can imagine, 12 years later, things have changed quite a bit, drastically even. So, the amount of anxiety in general that our adolescents are experiencing is significantly greater. So the statistics have been a little bit difficult to pinpoint. So the studies that have been done recently still show around 60%, but it's really hard to imagine it being just that when it was that way in 2014. So I would venture a guess that it may be even higher. We're just not able to pinpoint an exact number. Um, 80% we have found as recently as 2021 that in high stakes environments where there is pretty tremendous pressure, so students that are actively trying to get a certain score in order to pass a grade level or be able to attend a certain college, or for our students that are told that they have to get their TSIA 2 scores at a certain level. Um, for those high stakes situations, there is an increase of those who experience test anxiety. And so it's actually 80% on those statistics that have been recognized. So it's important for us to understand the actual definition of test anxiety. And so there's a simple textbook definition that's that's just an overactive, often unconscious threat response that's triggered by the act of testing, right? That's the basic academic version. But when you actually dig into the neuro science of it, you can see that it's actually an ongoing experience of stress that's caused by the combination of a rigorous, lengthy, usually high stakes exam and the added pressure that schools, families, and society places on students, or even students place on themselves. But what we're seeing a lot more of is that our school settings are becoming a little bit more um, conversational about the topic of what's at stake in these tests. So our students are feeling the pressure at a different level. I have she's currently 13, but my 13-year-old, when she was 9, she was preparing for her STAR test. And she started crying one day because she was so anxious about it. She was worried that she was going to be the reason that the school shut down. She legitimately thought that her scores made an impact on the funding of the school, which then made an impact on the school being able to stay open or close. So she carried the weight of that to the point where she agonized about it. And that's not uncommon. Students are hyper aware of the conversations going on around our the reasons why we do standardized testing of any kind. They're very aware of how their teachers may feel stress and they will pick up on that stress. They will feel their administrator's stress and they will pick up on that stress. And it'll just be a cycle. So we're seeing that a lot more. And I think that's why it has become a more prominent issue. So it's important to know that when we're talking about anything relating to anxiety, that there's a very important difference between nerves and anxiety. So when we're talking about nerves, nerves are normal. Feeling nervous about something that has pressure attached to it or has a performance assessment attached to it, it's normal to feel nervous about that, right? Um, but for nerves, the impact on performance is going to be moderate to minimal, whereas for anxiety, it's going to be severe. It's going to have a profound impact. The duration and intensity for nerves is temporary. Usually, you have a little bit leading up to it. It happens during the test, but then it'll dissipate once you get to the end of the test or you walk away from the test. But for those that have test anxiety, it's going to be ongoing because the amount of stress that builds up in their body lasts for hours to days, sometimes even weeks. Or if they have that experience that has caused anxiety, and then they have to go to something else that causes anxiety, that stress is going to actually live in their body long term, and it's going to potentially lead to some serious health concerns. So it's a much more important distinction when we have test anxiety. Physical symptoms for nerves can be just an increased heart rate, maybe the jitters, maybe a little shakiness, some sweaty palms, some temperature shifts. You might get suddenly cold. You might get really hot. Sometimes when I'm speaking, my cheeks get really hot because that's where apparently all my nervous energy goes to my cheeks. So if you see me looking really flush, I must be having a particularly nervous day while I'm talking. But for anxiety, it's not just an increased heart rate, it's a rapid heart rate that makes it really hard to calm yourself and to regulate. You might get nauseous, you might have a headache, sometimes even an intense headache. You might have a stomach ache, dizziness, and you'll have like a mental blank where you just cannot access anything in your brain. For cognitive effects, that's sort of tied to that blanking component. With nerves, you might have some difficulty concentrating. You might have a struggle to organize thoughts, but typically you can work through the stress in order to lay it all out and figure it out eventually. It might take a little bit of time, but you can usually get there within the test time frame. For anxiety, that comes with a whole line of negative self-talk. which leads to shame spiraling, beating up on yourself. Some people do it as a method of motivation. But what we're finding is that that negative self-talk and that shame spiraling actually leads you deeper and deeper into the anxiety and into the stress. Some people also experience catastrophizing. I am one of those people that has anxiety, general anxiety, and I do tend to catastrophize every single situation. So, if it's the other day, we were going to have some storms, and so my brain went to worst case scenario. There's going to be a tornado. It's going to completely trash my entire neighborhood. So I have to be on guard and prepared and awake the whole time, just in case. Not that I can do anything about it, not that I can stop the tornado. If I could, I don't know. That's a special set of skills I wouldn't know I had. But that's something that we do if we have anxiety. We go down this path of worst case scenarios. So for people who have test anxiety, imagine your most catastrophic situation. For our students, it's complete loss of value. Everybody's going to hate me. Everybody's going to blame me. Everybody's going to judge me. And they go down this path of that can lead to some really scary thoughts that we want to try to keep them from going to that level. They may even have total memory recall challenges. This also has sometimes been where they completely forget where they are. Their brain is not firing into the areas where they can have memory recall of any kind. So they're struggling to remember even basic facts of like what they had for breakfast that day or what time the test started. They will have these little gaps in their memory because of the amount of stress. So that makes it really difficult if you can't even remember those things. It's going to be really hard to remember academic content, and it's going to be really hard to problem solve and use critical thinking skills. Some people may have the urge to sleep, escape, explode, or cry, any type of big emotion just to get the stress out of their body. So let's talk about some of the common factors of why the anxiety comes into play during tests. Sometimes it is the content itself. Confusion is one of the main reasons why our students feel anxious. If they're confused about the content, they will feel any level. Some people experience discomfort a little bit, some people experience stress a little bit, some people experience it a lot just from the simple fact of being confused. So that's usually a factor. The time pressures can be a big one. You're more inclined to feel stress building up when you know you're working against a clock. Some people are able to use that stress, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Some people are not able to use that stress. It actually diminishes their capacity to respond in a productive way. Sometimes the setting is a factor. Believe it or not, a lot of times when our students are having test anxiety, it's because they're physically uncomfortable. The lights are too bright in the room, the chair is too uncomfortable, their clothes are itchy, and they're too hot, too cold. They're hangry, they're thirsty. Any of those physical symptoms and the setting of the test can play a role in why that stress starts to build up. The difficulty level can sometimes be an issue for our students. If they have thought they expected it to be a certain level of difficult and they read the question and suddenly they're going, I didn't prepare for this level of a question. And so they blank and they start to freak out. Sometimes the method of administration is a factor. Some students work much better on a test that has more visuals and involves a little bit more creative thinking. Some prefer words, reading, and just facts, facts, facts. Some people prefer digital, some prefer paper. It just depends on the student. So it's difficult for some of the methods of administration for all of our students' needs to be met. A lot of times, too, it comes from previous experiences. We build our understanding of who we are and what we can do and our capabilities based on what we've experienced in the past. So, if you have a student who has been not the best test taker in the past for whatever reason, they are going to feel higher pressure and they're going to feel that that pattern is going to continue to play out. It's what they've come to know. So they are going to continue to tell themselves that it's going to be a struggle for them. And then, of course, we have that the normal factors of did they get enough sleep the night before, their external stressors. They may have put a lot of value on the outcome of the test. Maybe they didn't prepare in enough ways that they wanted to. They ran out of time. All of these things can be an issue for students. Now, imagine for someone who has test anxiety that every single one of these factors is involved and the amount of weight that they are carrying when they enter the test environment. It's going to be really difficult for them to perform at a capacity that standardized test results readers, whether that's a computer or a human being, they're not gonna know the factors involved. They're not gonna know the amount of pressures that were weighing on this student as they were taking the test. So we already have a systemic struggle with understanding a student's capability based on the way that we administer tests. I mentioned earlier about catastrophizing, and so specifically for test anxiety, it's it's usually thinking that the outcome is going to play such a major role on their educational success overall. So a lot of times they think, I'm not going to pass this test no matter how much I try, so I'm just going to fail the class. It's not worth it. So they don't even want to try. And for our students, once they reach a certain age, their social circles and their peer, earning respect from their peers is huge. It's even more important than their own thoughts about themselves. And so if they feel like they're going to look dumb, for lack of a better word, they're going to look like they're not as intelligent as their friends, especially when we do reward parties and everybody gets to go except for the students that didn't make a certain score. That is going to be so shame inducing. They're going to feel like a fool in front of everybody. And so they automatically go to that negative place of thinking, I'm not good enough. I couldn't perform as well as that person or those people. And so it creates this isolated feeling that, again, only intensifies the anxiety. They'll also think about how they go into the day assuming it's going to be the worst day. So they're already coming in 10 steps behind where some of our other students are. So let's talk about why that happens. That felt a little bit bleak, so I promise I'm going to shift us more to what's happening and how we resolve what's happening in our bodies. So the brain plays a major role in our performance capability. So we want to pay attention to how the brain impacts everything that we do, and this is true of all behaviors. The information that I'm talking about today is true of any form of anxiety that you see and any major behavior you see. So, I mentioned earlier about productive stress. So, when we have productive stress, that is something that you can channel, you can use. It's short term, it's usually adrenaline fueled. It happens within seconds or minutes, and it's focused on the stress in the present moment. So, if you are able to channel it and use it, it can actually boost your focus and it can actually boost your energy. So, it'll make you lock in essentially. If you've ever, my husband likes to say that all the time, lock in. So he was a sports guy, and so he uses that with our kids all the time. But that is something that a lot of athletes will use, and we'll talk about that at the end of our time today as well. But for those who experience test anxiety, that stress is actually debilitating because that usually comes from a cortisol surge. So, this is that negative stress chemical, and cortisol takes a longer time to come into the system. And once it's there, it takes a lot of positive brain chemicals to try to slow it down and get it to regulate. So that can be difficult to do if you're living in a state of stress or you have such a big cortisol surge that you just don't have the time to regulate it in a 4 hour window. So it depends on the amount of stress that you feel with a situation. It's often ongoing. It's not something that you can uh, just kind of channel and be done with. It's going to continue on. It's usually future oriented because you're thinking not just about the present moment, but about the outcome for tomorrow and years to come, even. It can be overwhelming. And so that's difficult because you're not able to manage that stress. And instead of the productive stress that you can channel and use, this will actually slow things down, impair your focus, and decrease your energy. So why does that happen? Well, it's because our brain, bless it, is built in such an amazing way. And truly, I think it is fascinating the way our brains work, but there is so much to it. It is so complex. Our brains are the most fascinating things. But they actually operate, different areas of the brain operate. They can work together, but they also can separate and do their own thing. So we have different levels of our brain, and we have our cortex, which is where we have our thinking, learning, creativity, our complex thinking, decision making, and impulse control. And so this is what we need to be able to access when we're taking a test, when we're trying to perform at a certain level. We need the prefrontal cortex part of our brain. Then we move into our limbic system, which controls our emotions, our feeling connected to other people, our motivations, our awareness of rewards and consequences, our working memory. And so that is where a lot of different elements work together to be able to respond to different emotional situations or resolving stress, for example. And then what we call sometimes our downstairs brain is our brainstem. And this is solely about survival. So when your brain is using the brainstem, this is where things that are just happen automatically. This is where they live. So breathing, things you do without thinking, your heart rate, your hunger, your temperature awareness, feeling safe, or the survival response of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It all lives in the brainstem. So, what we see that happens whenever stress starts to build up in the body, that debilitating stress that kind of has this major surge and then is more difficult to regulate down, what we see is that it causes our brainstem to take full control, and then we are completely shut off from the upstairs parts of our brain. So we no longer are able to pull from our working memory. We're no longer able to feel connected to people. We're no longer able to feel safe because we feel cut off from those receptors, and we're certainly not able to use our logical brain, our reasoning. We're not able to tell the time and space. So all we know is that the stress is making us feel unsafe, and all I can do about it is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn in order to get away from the threat as soon as possible. So, what that looks like a lot of the times when we're talking about our test anxiety situations, when we have our brainstem activate and send us into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, um, for students who are fighters, which is me, I'm a fighter. So if you put me in a situation where I feel anxious, I am going to try my best. That's why I'm hyper alert whenever we were having storms the other night, because I'm ready to fight. Take on the tornado? Sure, why not? It makes total sense. It doesn't have to make sense. It's what my body is responding, and it's the way my body responds. I can't control it. So our fighters are going to be angry. They're going to be aggressive, usually argumentative along with that. Um, Oftentimes it'll look like some sort of emotional outburst or explosion. You might see some defiance where students absolutely refuse to take a test. I don't know if you've ever been a test proctor. I certainly have. Test refusal and task refusal is a very real thing. So students will just, I'm not doing it. You can't make me. Um, or my favorite, my mom signed a piece of paper. This is a note for my mom that says I don't have to take this test. which was thankfully was never my job to resolve that. I would just say, that sounds nice. I'm gonna send you to the administrator to have a chat. Um, sounds great to me. But it just depends on the kid, and it just depends on how their system reacts. For flight, you'll see some withdrawing, maybe some kind of closing off. If other friends are chatting, they're probably not going to engage. It's going to look like some task avoidance. So they might go in and out of taking the test. They might start, but then eventually, if you've seen those kids that are just like, I'm just going to circle all the answers and I'm just going to put my pencil down, I'm going to go to sleep. We see that a lot. Sometimes they'll escape by taking frequent breaks, constantly needing to use the restroom. Sometimes they'll cry because they need to get the stress out some way, and so the tears will just come. Um, Usually for our kiddos that have a flight response, it's not a loud cry. It's going to be more of like the silent, just to themselves cry, trying to get the stress to leave their body. And then for our freeze responders, this is usually total shutdown, disassociation, a brain blank, where they just cannot respond when you speak to them and they cannot answer the question. If you try to ask them even some of the simplest things, they just cannot pull from that working memory. Sometimes it's daydreaming. They'll try to escape by zoning out and going into daydream land because that's at least a happy land to live in for a little bit. And then our fawners. Fawning is an interesting one because this is more of a people pleasing one, usually. So our fawners want to survive by um, having other people support them in the process, or if they need to achieve a certain status in order to get the thing that they need to survive, they'll do whatever it takes to get that. So you might see some manipulation trying to charm their way out of taking the test, or trying to charm their way into changing up the way it's administered or something. They're gonna try to manipulate the situation. Occasionally this looks like cheating because they really want to do well, they really want to perform well, and so they'll do whatever it takes to get there. Sometimes the fawner wants to take extended time because they're shifting into perfection mode. And so they're going to need as much time as possible to check, double check, triple check, read it again, make sure they have everything right. It just depends on the situation. And it's important to know that even though those are some of the observable behaviors that we can pick up on, what's happening inside is equally as important for our students to understand. So, inside, and this is not true for everybody, but you may have one or two, you may have all, it just depends. But this will look like a feeling of overwhelm as the test date nears, an inability to concentrate before, during, and after the test, inability to rest. So, when we talk about how important it is to get a good night's sleep beforehand, our students who have test anxiety cannot sleep beforehand. They cannot get a good amount of sleep beforehand. So they're going to struggle even more because they're not well rested. It may look like faster, shallow breathing, headaches, we mentioned, may even be agitation. They may get irritable with sometimes the smallest things, which makes the setting of the test even more problematic if their clothes are itchy or if something is just bugging them. I know some students who kind of had to get out of the room because they were getting so frustrated by the texture of their pencil. It was not writing smoothly, and so they kept having to sharpen it. And when it wouldn't get sharp enough, they had to get out of the room. Sometimes they can feel faint. Sometimes our students do actually faint. They do actually feel so much stress that they pass out. Sometimes that increased heart rate plays a factor, and nausea, of course, we mentioned, and then sweating, we mentioned. So if our students are experiencing any of that, we need to help them be able to understand that that's a sign that they are not experiencing normal nerves, things that can be productive. They're actually experiencing anxiety. The response to nerves versus anxiety and productive stress versus debilitating stress is very different. So we have to help them understand what it looks like. And I love this quote. I come back to it all the time. Unfortunately, my nervous system doesn't know the difference between Play-Doh colors being mixed together and being chased by a bear. Survival all the same. If we have people who are particularly detail oriented, that's going to be, yeah, I bet that maybe sent us all into a little bit of a eye twitching moment. But truly, our survival instincts cannot tell the difference between being chased by a bear and anything else that causes actual anxiety. And so for those students who are experiencing test anxiety, just imagine that you put them in a closed room with a bear. That is how intensely they are feeling the stress and needing to respond with some survival instincts. And that is how much they are going from the prefrontal cortex down to their brainstem. So they are having to work so much harder to get to the point where they can successfully perform on this test. And it's important to know some of our students have learned that when they go into their fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, they have learned some regulation tools. And so they may be able to work their way back up to a place of calm and stability. They may be able to seem like they can talk, they can perform. They may feel calm. You, as the educator or the parent, may perceive them as calm, but it doesn't mean that they're ready to learn. Here's what's important when we talk about the stress response cycle is that it's a process. So when our students are feeling stress and they go into that nervous system state, their senses are taking full control. And so they're scanning the environment for cues of safety or threat. And for them, the test itself and any of those factors we mentioned are a threat. So they feel like they are not safe. And when I say safe, I don't mean physically safe all the time. I mean they have those negative outcomes waiting for them on the other side of this test, and that makes them feel unsafe. The potential for embarrassment or their future to be impacted. It's a very big threat. So when they sense that threat, they're going to go into that activated mode and their body is going to stay activated until either the threat is removed or they can resolve the stress and feel safe again. And so then they'll go into that regulation and reasoning process. And there's no time frame for how long it takes to reach the point of homeostasis because it's different for everybody. So regulating may take a long time for some people. What we experience when I say calm does not equal ready is that a lot of people will get stuck in that regulation and reasoning process. And rather than resolving their stress, they might push through it. And so their cortisol is not able to fully regulate back down to a manageable level. So even if they think that they're calm, they think that they're ready, they may not be because they're actually stuck right in the middle of their limbic system here. And if they're stuck here, the slightest shift of feeling unsafe for whatever reason is going to send them all the way back down to the bottom, to the brainstem. And so if we're up here, it would take a little bit more intensity to bring them down. But if they haven't fully regulated, they're going to slip back down much faster with much more intensity sometimes. And so it's important that we know the difference of being ready versus just being calm. So that leads me to what do we do with our students? I've just kind of given you a whole backlog of information about what's happening, what test anxiety is, what's causing it. But now, how do we actually help our students learn how to regulate? And how do we work with them as educators and parents and ideally even test creators and legislators? That's a pipe dream maybe, but maybe we can all get on the same page and do what's best for our kids and give them tools to succeed. But for now, what we have is helping parents, educators, and students get onto the same page for how they can succeed. So first, in the moment, if you have a child that's experiencing this, they're in the stress cycle, they're trying to regulate. Step one is always to be a regulated adult. In order to help your child or the student, you yourself have to be in a steady mental, emotional, and physical state. So this is where that school environment and talking about the test itself and the outcomes of the test can be really difficult because, again, if you are stressed, the students will pick up on that. And for our students that have test anxiety, they're going to not only pick up on that, they're going to take your stress on top of theirs. So they're going to be carrying much more than the average student test taker would. So you have to be regulated yourself. You have to detach value from the outcome of the test. You have to provide all of the regulating tools possible to help this student and essentially lend them your prefrontal cortex. Because if you can think in a problem-solving critical way and you can feel calm and stable, that helps them to feel calm and stable. So that leads into the process of co-regulation. So you have to offer your steadiness. Sometimes it's just talking slowly, gently, making sure they understood that there's not a threat to their life long term, talking to them about how to come out of catastrophe mode, how to breathe to get their heart rate to come down, and then doing some things that are not just relaxing, but regulating and soothing in order to get their nervous system to come out of the brainstem and release more of the happy chemicals that will counteract the negative stress chemicals. Offering choices is really important, and we'll talk about that in just a second. My child is, well, so I have three children. My 13-year-old definitely has test anxiety. My 8-year-old definitely has general anxiety. And so I have learned a lot about how to help them regulate. And so offering choices is really good because when they're in that place where um, they can't access the upper parts of their brain, offering them some sort of visual choice board that is specific to them really helps them because then they can just point to what they want. They don't have to really think about it. They just know what's there. They know what tools are at their disposal. They can think about what would soothe them in the moment, and they can point to a visual option. And then once we've come to a place of regulation, we want to identify the needs. So we want to help them be able to express whatever emotions or physical symptoms they're experiencing because that helps us hone in on where the stress is coming from. If they are feeling more of if they're having more of a shame spiral reaction, then that's probably coming from that thought that I'm going to completely just ruin my life if I don't do well on this test. Whereas if they are um, worried about their social circle and how they're going to look to other people, then that would help us address kind of that placement of value on social relationships. So helping them have that awareness will eventually allow them to self-regulate. So that way they can do it if you're not around or if there's not around and give them the opportunity to be able to manage that on their own. So this is, I mentioned my 8-year-old. This is her actual choice board that we have at our house. And so she, bless her, she is an ADHDer, aren't we all? I am. So I can relate to this. But she is someone who needs movement. She has to regulate by moving. She has to get that energy out. And so when she is starting to seem like she's entering her stress response system, this is when I show her these options and she can point to what she needs. And so we have all of these things in our house. We have a trampoline, a punching bag, or a pillow if you don't have a punching bag or in your house, stretching, bike, dancing, drumming, rocking in a chair, or even doing push-ups. Sometimes heavy movement is a quick way to release some of that stress. Getting your muscles moving will help it flow. So that's just an example of what yours could be. Obviously, this would look different for each kid. Some students are not movement based. Some students are more sensory based. Some students are more like proprioceptive, so they need different types of pressure. in order to regulate. So it just depends on each student, but having that choice board available is really helpful. Um, as long as any of the materials on your choice board are not connected to the content of the exam, if you have access to something that you can use, um, for example, we use wobble cushions a lot for students that need movement. So if it's an option to have that as an accommodation and have that as something that you bring into the testing room, let's go for it. Let's try it. And if that's not an option, is there a sensory tool that we can use? Is there something that is soothing to rub in your hands? Some sort of fidget or squishy item. My 13-year-old absolutely loves squishies. We have a regular, of course, she's on TikTok now, and so she has a squishy haul that she does multiple times a month, it seems like. And squishies are getting expensive, so we're gonna have to find some other options for her. But she's just one of those people that she needs that stretchy, kind of soothing sensory experience in order to regulate. Um, some students usually need a snack. Some type of crunchiness can be soothing. Chewing on ice can be really soothing. Changing temperature can be soothing. So having an ice pack even can be nice. Having a blanket that's weighted to wrap up in can be nice. All of these things. Again, as long as it's not impacted or attached to the content of the test, usually there are ways to be able to have access to those tools. So, kind of branching off of that, usually our regulation tools fall into those categories of sensory, physical, or mental. What we can have for sure is the physical element. If your student needs a break, if they need movement, especially if that chair is uncomfortable, they've been sitting for so long and they can't focus because they're stiff and they need to move. Standing up to take a stretch, you can do that at any point. You don't have to stop your test in order to stand up and stretch. Or even at your desk, if you feel embarrassed to stand up and stretch, being able to stretch your legs out, stretch your hands out, stretch your neck, roll your shoulders, do something. You can at least get your muscles moving in that way. If you can take a break to go to the bathroom or go into the hall, if you're someone that's like my 8-year-old and needs to do push-ups or needs to do a couple jumping jacks, you can do that on your way to the bathroom, in the bathroom even. Um, get your workout in wherever you can. Then we, of course, have our deep breathing, and deep breathing is going to be one of the main resources that you hear for regulation because you need that oxygen flow in order to slow your heart rate and steady yourself. You need to be able to get that sense of calm flowing throughout your entire body, and deep breathing is the best way to do that. And then, of course, for our students who need um, mental support, reframing negative thoughts. So instead of saying, this is going to be the worst day, thinking something like, this is going to be uh, maybe a little bit of a challenge, but I know that I have studied as hard as I can. I know that my family still loves me, my friends still love me. I know that this test does not define who I am as a person. And I know that there are still opportunities for me to succeed other than just this test. And that's the thing that I think needs to be mentioned more. Colleges are not only looking at your SAT, ACT scores anymore. They are looking at portfolios. They're looking at collected works. They are looking at reference letters. They're looking at who you are as a holistic student more than they are looking at just your SAT, ACT scores. So some students haven't quite learned that they can detach some of the value for college entry exams from that test. Um, and then, man, I wish I could go back in time and tell my 13-year-old when she was 9, I wish I could go back and tell her again, your school is not going to shut down just because you didn't perform well on the test. I wish I could have honed in on that earlier so that I could have helped her before she got to that point. But at least I know that now. And so now we talk about that anytime she has a big test, and she has gotten better. She's been able to remove her value away from the outcome of the test. We'll also want to talk about our circle of control. And we'll do that in just a minute. And then our anchor chart or images. So anchor charts are things that are going to help us stay grounded, are going to serve as reminders of those reframing techniques. So images are great. If you have a pet that you especially love and brings you a lot of joy, having a picture of your pet is fantastic. And again, it's not dealing with the content of the test. So you usually are able to have a picture of your pet that you can just set off to the side and is not bothering anybody. You can have images that are especially calming for you or soothing for you. So some people like to have pictures of nature or a family member, or sometimes they like certain colors. Sometimes they like certain um, phrases, motivational quotes that help them kind of repeat that to themselves as an affirmation. Whatever it is that helps the students stay grounded is what they can use. And of course, as we're helping our students prepare to take the test, we want to make sure that they are leading up to the test with as much positivity and um, the good brain neurotransmitters as possible. Uh, so we often say get your daily dose. So dopamine, which is your reward chemical. So if you complete a task, if you try new things, if you do something that is involving self-care or celebrating small wins that you had, that will release dopamine into your system. This one I do want to mention, we have to be careful with because we are dealing in a different time. We have a frequent influx of dopamine into our system. So our students are not able to access as much dopamine as they once could. So this one is tricky because you want your child to be getting dopamine from um, more of these doing tasks, more of these self-care tasks, not from other things that give dopamine, like watching videos um, or doing something on the digital end, because that will push too much dopamine and that can be problematic as well. So something that's more of a physical task or something that um, works in partnership with your other positive neurotransmitters is good. Then, of course, we've got our oxytocin, which is our love chemical, and that's playing with a pet. So, again, not just the picture of the pet, but before you go take your test, after you go take your test, if you need to cuddle a puppy, you cuddle a puppy. You do what you need to do. If you need to have a puppy in there, worth a question, worth an ask. I do know some people who have allowed it where they could have some support animals available for during breaks and things like that. Not a bad idea. Playing with a baby because babies make us happy and they smell really great. And so, well, most of the time, but you know what I'm saying. Playing with a baby helps us get some laughs out, helps us release some of those love connection chemicals. Helping others actually is a really good way to release oxytocin. Getting hugs is a great way to do that. Then we've got our serotonin, which is our mood stabilizer. Being in nature, walking barefoot on the grass outside. In Texas, it's a little tricky because of all the areas where we have stickers. So maybe make sure it's a sticker-free zone out there. But getting grounded into the earth is really helpful to be able to just kind of connect and get outside of your body for a moment. Sunshine is great. Vitamin D is going to have a positive impact on our mood. Positive conversations. This is really important for our adolescents as well. If they have friend groups or if they're coming from homes, if you're the educator and you're trying to work with students on this, that they come from homes that involve a lot of negative self-talk or negative talk in general, having positive conversations, supportive, encouraging conversations is going to be huge to boost our serotonin level. And then a good food, good snack. Have a good snack with you when you go take a test. Something that will really be regulating to your system because it's just so delicious. You can't help but have a positive reaction to it. And then endorphins, of course, this is why sometimes exercise is really beneficial in the middle of a test, stretch break, jumping jacks, anything like that. Um, Dark chocolate actually can release endorphins as well. Listening to music, laughing, quickest way to complete the stress cycle is to laugh, and a good, like, solid laugh, and keep it going. And then, of course, we have our regular coping skills. Sometimes journaling is a great way for our students to track patterns. So they know if there's a certain time or a certain type of test, certain content of test that sends them into more of an experience of test anxiety. Journaling is a good way to really track that to see what's working, what's not working. Have we identified the root cause of the anxiety? Do we need to keep looking for it? What's happening here? Movement again, body scanning, see if there's any areas of tension, because what happens a lot of the times is when we get stressed out, our body will naturally tense up. And the more tense we are, the less our body is able to regulate. So doing a body scan, seeing if there's any areas of tension, and then doing some progressive muscle relaxation activities to release the tension is good. Of course, sleep habits. And like I mentioned, if your student is experiencing test anxiety, it's going to be really hard for them to sleep. Drinking tea, warm tea, soothing tea, chamomile, lavender tea, peppermint tea, sometimes if you have headaches, that is a great way to try to relax before bed. Getting off of any screen, reading a book, stretching before bed. Sometimes, if you need to use other natural aids to assist in restful sleep, like if you take a magnesium supplement, sometimes that can relax the muscles if you've got muscle tension that keeps you from sleeping. Um, you hear different reactions on melatonin, but a small amount of melatonin on occasion shouldn't be too problematic if it does help you get a restful night's sleep. And then, of course, socializing, because again, having positive, encouraging conversations can help you feel connected to other people and help you mitigate any of that preliminary stress that's causing anxiety. And then, of course, as always, with anything that I recommend, make sure that you get your mental health support, because everybody needs someone who is professionally trained to help you identify where your stress is coming from, the root cause, what's underneath that. Particularly if our students are dealing with like self-worth and value, you need to have a therapist help you get to the bottom of that, because that is something that is not going to impact just their test anxiety, but is also going to impact general anxiety. So we want to help them figure out what that is, and that does take someone who really can walk them through the process of figuring out what's causing it and how to reframe that and retrain their brain to think differently. And then, of course, lack of preparation is a huge factor in test anxiety. That same 2014 study said that 70% of students state that feeling underprepared was their primary source of test anxiety. So, this is for students who pretty much solely have test anxiety and don't have other general anxiety concerns. But 70% is a pretty big number of that 60% that do experience test anxiety. So, how do we help them feel more prepared? Well, we help them study well. We work smarter, not harder. We don't have to drill, 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 drill. We have to study in a way that the information is actually comfortable, internalized, and able to be called upon when we need it. So, socializing your study, studying with a partner, a group, or even as a family, um, using different types of practice questions, some that are tied to real life scenarios, real life situations. That's going to stick and resonate with the student much more than a make believe scenario. Um, Make sure that it's timely. Do scheduled short sessions on a regular, ongoing basis. The longer your study session, the more, uh, the less enjoyment you'll have from studying. But if you do it short bursts, if you do it in a social setting, if you do it with practice questions that you can relate to, you're going to have much better results of retaining that information. And then the number one way to retain any type of academic material or any knowledge is to reteach it. So create a lesson on the topics where you're struggling or on the areas where you're having a hard time, and teach it to someone else to see if you are able to successfully teach that information and pass that information along. So this is a good thing to do if you have a tutor or you have someone in the family or in your friend group that is especially good at that topic. Having them be your student so you can teach it, so they can say, yes, we've got it, or actually, here's where we need to tweak and rethink a little bit, can be really beneficial. And then, of course, I mentioned the circle of control, which is there are always going to be things that are within our concern, things that may cause us stress or cause us to feel anxious. And so there are a lot of factors there, but those are things that concern us, but we don't really have a direct influence on. Then we've got our circle of influence. These are concerns that maybe we can do something about. So these we can maybe take a little time here and there to focus on and try to take steps to change. But ultimately, not that button. Ultimately, we have to focus on what is in our circle of control, what is fully within our own power. So our attitude about the test, positive self-talk, self-awareness of what's happening in our bodies, asking for help with people who can really provide you the tools and resources that you need. And then your actions. Are you going to be able to use the tools to regulate, or are you going to shift into survival mode? And are you going to react in a way that's going to actually take you out of your thinking brain? We have to focus on what we can control and then let go of everything that we cannot have a direct impact on. That's going to be the best way to get us regulated and back into our thinking brain. Of course, there are accommodations that can be done with schools. Sometimes our students may need to look at 504 accommodations, ADA accommodations, depending on which type of test you're taking, where you're taking it, what's available. Sometimes we need study assistants. Sometimes we need student advocates. We need people to say, it would be great if the testing environment looked like this. It would be great if we had snacks. It would be great if we had a, a, a puppy available for breaks, somebody who can advocate for things that will help mitigate that anxiety. And then, of course, frequently having our administrators, having our curriculum developers look at those testing policies and procedures to see if there's anything that can be done to help our students. And then, of course, mental health. I mentioned the licensed professionals helping us get to the bottom of it, getting our therapeutic tools. I mentioned our sensory supports that we could use, but then especially, I mentioned it briefly, but our proximity to a safe person. If our student is in the middle of a test, we want to make sure that they have access to someone. If it's not going to be a family member or a friend that makes them feel safe, is there an educator on campus? Is there a counselor on campus? Someone who they feel safe with and that they can turn to if they are really struggling with their anxiety. At home, I know we're running up on time, so I'm going to wrap this up quickly if I can, but for the parents, make sure that you're talking about the feelings that they're experiencing and the senses. Try to track it if you can to see if there are any patterns, if there are any certain types of environments. Sometimes the students don't know that it's the brightness of the light that's bothering them. It's the temperature of the room that's bothering them. It's the discomfort in the seat. Sometimes they don't know. They can't articulate. So having something that you can track and see if you can pick up on repeat issues that you run across can help. Educate your child about what's happening and then remove the pressure where possible. If you can remove pressure from you, great. You may not be able to remove the pressure from the school, the teachers, the administrators, everywhere beyond that, but you can at least remove pressure at home and you can let them know that there is no shame involved with experiencing test anxiety. And the outcome of that test does not define who they are and how you see them or how the people who love them see them. So detaching that value from the outcome kind of goes along with that. And then help them with their studying. Establish those study plans or practice games that you can do together. Promote those healthy habits, help them get better sleep, help them get nutritious foods. And then if you need to, work with educators and therapists for specific tools. Um, Education works best when we're all in it together. If we are all on the same team and if we're all pushing for the same outcome. So ideally, we want to be able to have that conversation with our students and with one another. I did have a video to share, but it would take a little bit extra time. But basically, he's talking about how to make your test anxiety work like another performance anxiety that is a little bit more productive stress. And basically he just says to channel your adrenaline before it gets to the point of releasing too much cortisol. And so the best way to do that is to do some of those preventative strategies and get ahead of it. Okay, I'm going to come out of my screen share so that I can see you. Hello, your faces are back. I didn't see any of your reactions that whole time, so I hope they were delightful. Um, in my mind, Laura was laughing at several thoughts I okay. But do y'all have any questions? I know we're right at time. Okay.
Very
Well, if
helpful. Thank you.
oh good, I'm so glad. Um, I
Yes,
do
very
have
wonderful.
oh good. I do have much more that I wanted to share, but just had to, get nitpicky on what I included. So if you would like additional resources, if you would like help reaching out to your schools or finding some options for counseling support or anything like that, you can email me, kelly.morris at ese9.net. If I hadn't stopped my screen share, it would be on the screen right now, but Melissa can send that out as well. And yeah, that's all I've got. Thank y'all so much.
All right, and I will be sending out the recording, and this will also be on the Parenting Pit Stops website on Region 9. So, like I said, thank you for doing this. And if they have questions, then they can email you. So, fantastic
Awesome.
job.
Thank you.
All right.